For the purposes of this introductory course, we explored 4 main theory groups which influence second language learning and acquisition. These are behaviorism, cognitivism, constructivism, and mediationalism. We're going to start with behaviorism. Behaviorism was introduced in the early 1930s by B.F. Skinner. The behaviorists viewed language as an automatic system. They used the theory of tabula rasa, or the idea that a baby is born as a blank slate. This theory teaches that, in general, all knowledge is learned from experience. For behaviorists, language learning is more about memorization and recall than it is about developing language. For example, Pavlov was a behaviorist. He's most famous for his dog and bell experiment, where he used the stimulus of a bell to condition a dog to start salivating involuntarily every time he rang the bell because that ring was always associated with food. It's the same with behaviorist-based language approaches. Many rely on methods which require students to repeat after the teacher instead of creating or taking ownership of their own language. For example, memorizing verb endings to learn Spanish verb conjugations. Often in a Spanish class, the teacher will have students repeat the AR verb endings of o, as, a, amos, ais, and an to make recall of those endings more automatic. For the behaviorists, memorizing this rule and others similar to it is all you need to acquire a language. Around the 1950s, new theorists began countering behaviorist ideas, leading to the creation of our second main theory group, Cognitivism. Cognitivists believe that we have an innate system to be able to learn language. A prominent cognitivist, Noam Chomsky, founded this idea, claiming that we have a language acquisition device, or LAD. He argued that we are all born with a pre-structured system in our brains that allows us to learn and use language. However, the tenets of this theory were based only on first language acquisition. It doesn't apply as well to second language acquisition. Extending from his LAD concept, Chomsky also promoted his theory of universal grammar, or UG. This is the basic idea that we have an ability to understand language structure, or grammar, to help us learn and use different parts of language appropriately. The cognitivists claim that you are born with the ability to decode any language, but you need to study it. The more you study it, the more accurately you will use your first language system. This is known as competence and performance. For the cognitivists, thinking is not a behavior, but rather a full part of learning. Around the 1970s, theorists began extending Chomsky's cognitive theory and branched out to focus more on processes and usage of language, such as language input and output. Constructivists claimed that language patterns were not only learned explicitly, but implicitly as well. Constructivism is the idea that language is built on patterns and the system has a step-by-step trajectory. A notable constructivist was Stephen Krashen. He created the input hypothesis, which states that learning is acquired through something called comprehensible input. Comprehensible input is providing generalized context to help students understand the information being presented. For example, a teacher could be drawing a picture of a face, and as specific parts of the face are drawn, the teacher says the German word for each part. This gives the student a visual context to help them understand the meaning of each German word. Merrill Swain, a former constructivist that later became a Vygotskian mediationalist, developed beyond Krashen's ideas, adding the output hypothesis. The output hypothesis taught that input alone was insufficient, but the output, or the use of language by the learner, is critical in learning a second language. Another cognitive constructivist, Michael Long, developed the interaction hypothesis, which argues that output, or interaction with native speakers through simple, almost childlike speech, is key to second language acquisition. Constructivist theories were being formed during a technological revolution, which brought new ways of perceiving the brain as a computer, hence the terms processes, input and output, and system to understand the brain. In the 1920s and 30s, Lev Vygotsky introduced a cultural historical theory, which many call socio-cultural theory. This theory focuses on consciousness as key to learning and development. This was an early response to behaviorism. However, Vygotsky's ideas were not accepted by the developing Soviet government, and after his death in the early 1930s, his writings were banned. His psychology for learning, including new languages, did not resurface again until the late 1960s. The reemergence of Vygotsky's work challenges the more prevalent concepts of behaviorism, cognitivism, and cognitive constructivism found in school curriculums today. The central tenet of Vygotsky's theory is that the mind learns and develops through the use of mediational tools such as people, artifacts, and experiences. All mediational theories, such as activity theory, cultural historical activity theory, and sociocultural theory, are rooted in Vygotsky's work. Mediationalism proposes that humans do not act on the world directly, but instead rely on indirect tools to raise the teacher and student's consciousness and cognition during more challenging processes. With mediationalism, the learning process is more involved than memorization or similar methods, because mediationalism's goal is concerned with learning leading to development. Such development takes place through the use of tools, which can be literal or figurative as long as they aid and support the teaching-learning process. With mediation, the learner is the agent, capable of taking charge of their own learning and how they use the mediational tools. Mediational tools help teachers and students perform in a zone of proximal development, or ZPD, which is an activity that amplifies the teaching-learning experience for both. For example, gesture as a mediational tool has been known to support communication both in first and second language learning. A teacher who understands this concept may watch an English learner's gestures and realize additional information and knowledge that the student knows but cannot yet articulate verbally. So in student-friendly terms, behaviorism focuses on making language automatic. Cognitivism is the idea that we have a built-in system in the brain to learn language. Constructivism teaches that students build patterned language systems. And mediationalism focuses on raising both the teacher and student's consciousness during the teaching-learning process, using mediational tools which make more challenging processes achievable.